pulled up to the cliff thinking it was just another ruin, but the lighthouse's lamp swept the black like a living eye, and it shone straight at our faces as we climbed. The four of us had chased abandoned places long enough to call them safe risks. Barns, hotels, a collapsed pier, places that creaked with old stories but never looked back. The lighthouse on Blackwater Point was different the moment we saw it. Rust scored its iron spine, sea spray had carved tiny rivers in the stone. Windows were smashed, the gallery rail sagged, and the keeper's cottage was a skeleton of blackened beams. Yet the lantern high above spun with an even, slow deliberation, throwing a cold blade of light across the cliff and into the churning dark. Alex swore at the sight. "No way," he said. "Records say this place shut down 30 years ago. The storm took the keeper and the family. It was supposed to be dead." The light wheeled again, sweeping over the rocks as if to prove him wrong. We parked and climbed through grass flattened by wind. When we stepped into the foyer, the air changed, cooler, as if the stone itself exhaled. Dust lay in layers, but there was a narrow trail where the dust was disturbed, like a person had recently passed that way. Someone had been here, or something. My flashlight painted the stairwell in trembling circles, the spiral wound upward, metal steps crying under our weight, each turn sucking more of us into the tower's center. Alex's radio, the cheap thing he kept clipped to his belt, crackled with static. He hit the switch and swore as a voice, thin and distant, threaded through the noise. Upstairs. Not a radio signal. Something else. A whisper shaped into a command. We froze. The sound had no source we could see. It was inside the plaster, inside the wood. A voice anchored to the building. Higher and higher we climbed. At the first landing, someone had smeared handprints along the whitewashed wall. They were not human-sized, the fingers elongated and too narrow to belong to anyone we knew. The marks had a glossy sheen, like salt or oil. Maya scoffed, but her laugh was too sharp. "Maybe the tide keeps bringing people up here," she said, nervous. She picked up a single page of a notebook wedged in a stair crevice. The ink was wet on the edge, still bleeding into the grain. The page read, in a shaky hand, "They say I should stop. I cannot stop the light." Beneath that, new letters scratched themselves as we watched, the pen not touching the paper. "You came back. No one said anything for a long time." Climbing felt less like exploration and more like walking into the lungs of something that breathed when we moved. The lantern room door was ajar at the top. Warm mechanical hum thudded against steel. We pushed in and the room opened like an altered emotion. Brass gears, a mirror array, the huge Fresnel lens turning with the care of a heartbeat. No person stood at the lantern. There were tools laid out as if someone stepped away to fetch an oil can and never returned. The light itself was hypnotic, a wide white blade slicing reality into slices. In the glass, our reflections trembled. Then Alex's reflection blinked before he did. He stared at his hands. "That wasn't me," he whispered. "I didn't." He stopped. We all felt it then. The impression of someone behind us, patient enough to wait while we noticed. I turned. No one there yet when we faced the glass again. A figure stood close behind our reflections, tall, wrapped in a coat that glistened like old tar, head cocked as if listening to an unseen melody. The figure's face sat in shadow, but its shoulders were hunched toward us in a manner that read like invitation or accusation. I couldn't decide which. We tried to leave. The stairwell rumbled under our feet as if the tower sought to shake us free. The beam stuttered and quickened, sweeping down in staccato bursts, each one painting the cliffside in white and black. Somewhere below, the rocks answered with a roar. Alex's foot slipped on the wet metal. He grabbed the rail hard enough to white his knuckles. At the same time, the journal Maya carried fell open in her hands, and spilled fresh words across the page, lines that had not been there when she read before. Do not leave. The shift is not finished. The letters were crisp, carved as ink into paper by no hand we could see. Panic sharpened our senses. We moved faster, a clumsy melee of limbs and breath, but each turn of the coil felt longer than the last, as if the tower lengthened its steps to draw out our fear. Shadows gathered at the edges of the stairs, thin silhouettes that slid along the iron like oil. When we reached the exit, the double doors refused to budge. The bolt had slid out and in on its own. The handles chilled our palms. From above, the radio noise swelled into a chorus, voices layered like 100 seamstresses sewing the dark into tighter cloth. The sound whispered names, our names. Then the lamp blinked, and the world narrowed to the beam hitting the cliff in a long white slash. In that instant, the light arrested our attention, focused like a lens, and the faces pressed against the lantern's interior glass became clear. There were dozens of faces flattened like leaves against wet glass, some small, some old, some with the waxen look of people who had waited too long. They looked as if they had been watching the sea for years, and now they watched us with the terrible curiosity of someone who remembers being remembered. Their mouths mouthed words we could not hear, but somehow understood. Come, stay. We hammered on the doors. We screamed. For a breathless minute, the lantern continued to pulse its mechanical heartbeat, and the voices held steady. Then, as if satisfied, the lamp slowed. The beam swung past us once, twice, and settled, aimed straight at the path where we had first parked. The tower's engine hummed down like a beast curling to sleep, and in the sudden lull, a final line crawled across the journal in letters darker than the others. Welcome back, shift's not over. We could have run then. We could have dropped everything and fled into the fog, but something pulled at our feet. Not hands, but gravity, shaped by memory, an insistence that we belonged, that we had come home to work, a watch we forgot we once apprenticed for. Alex took one step toward the lantern room glass and pressed his palm to the cold brass. His face reflected twice, the man he was and the man the glass wanted him to be. He smiled, and for a terrifying second, I watched recognition pass across his features, as though he remembered a life the rest of us had not been given. Maya grabbed his arm, pulling, and he turned slowly, obeying some deep muscle memory, and looked at us with a face that never truly belonged again. I'm not, he started, and then the whisper in the radio turned into a single, precise phrase that threaded itself into his mouth as if it had been waiting for vocabulary. Finish the watch. When I snapped out of it, I was outside on the cliff. The storm had rolled in hard enough to sting my skin with salt. The lighthouse stood behind us, quiet, the Fresnel lens dark as coal. The door we'd battered open lay unlatched. My friends were gone. The footprints that led away were soft and many, like the step of someone carrying a dozen coats. In the shallow pool where we'd set our backpacks, the radio lay face down, the battery warm under the tide of mud. On its screen, faint and looping, the same line scrawled over and over in a shaky print, shift's not over. I left that night and didn't look back. I told myself rational stories, hypothermia, isolated suggestion, a prank, but the pieces did not fit together like a prank. 3 days later, the news ran a tiny item. A search party found supplies stacked in the keeper's cottage: blankets, oilskins, a little stove, and 6 pairs of older boots lined by the hearth, all polished as if waiting for legs, no bodies. No explanation. And once, very late, driving past the headland where the foghorn moaned, I thought I saw someone standing at the gallery, a thin shape, hands on the rail, watching the sea. The lamp did not stir. It did not need to. On the anniversary of that night, I still wake to a scratch at the window, a soft, patient sound like someone tracing their name on glass. If I listen hard enough, under the buzz of my own doubt, I can hear the radio whisper from a distant memory, upstairs. The painting didn't scare me at first. It was just a forest scene. But when the shadows inside it started stepping closer every night, I realized something wasn't staying inside the canvas. The antique shop felt like the kind of place where time stalled. Dusty lampshades, cracked wooden frames, shelves stacked with forgotten objects that sucked the life out of the room. I wasn't planning to buy anything. I only stepped inside because the rain was coming down in heavy sheets, and the shop was the nearest shelter. The painting caught my eye in the back corner. It was nearly as tall as I was, framed in dull brass, warped with age. The canvas showed a narrow woodland trail, disappearing into a cluster of black trees. The brushwork was strange. The scene looked flat in some places, too detailed in others, as if the artist couldn't decide what reality should look like. And right in the center, half hidden between the trunks, stood a lone figure. Its shape blurry, like the painter had second thoughts and smeared the body with a thumb. The shop owner practically shoved it into my hands. Old man with yellow eyes and a voice like he swallowed dust for breakfast. "It wants a home," he muttered. "That one doesn't like being alone." I should have walked out. Instead, I paid $20 and carried the thing to my apartment, still telling myself the old man was trying to be quirky instead of threatening. I hung the painting in the living room. The wall felt empty without it. Too empty. Like I'd just removed something heavier than a picture the first night. Cold air pulled near the frame. Not a breeze. A cold spot. The kind you feel instantly, like walking into a freezer. I brushed it off as bad insulation. Around what I think was midnight, I caught something odd on the canvas. The figure in the forest wasn't as far back as before. It seemed closer to the path, closer to the viewer. I leaned in until my breath fogged the glass. Still one figure, still blurry. Maybe I misremembered its position. Second night, the chill got worse. My teeth literally chattered when I crossed the living room. And the painting, well, now the figure wasn't alone. A second silhouette stood beside it, darker, taller, as if made with heavier paint strokes. I took a photo with my phone to compare it to yesterday's picture. The first photo showed only one figure. The new photo, still the same single figure. I stared at my screen long enough for my fingers to go numb. Something was wrong with the canvas itself. The changes were only visible in person, not through a lens. Third night, the second silhouette was closer to the frame, and its head angled toward me like it was acknowledging my attention. I swear the air near the painting pulsed. A subtle vibration ran through my fingertips when I touched the frame, and the cold spot spread across half the room. I moved the painting to the closet. That was a mistake. The knocking started an hour after I shut the door. Slow, patient taps, 3 at a time. Coming from inside the closet, I opened the door, heart pounding, and the painting leaned against the wall exactly where I left it. But the forest trail inside the canvas was brighter, as if the moon in the painting had grown larger, and now 3 figures stood on the path. The original blurry one, the tall one behind it, and a third crouched low, like a waiting animal. The tapping stopped only when I moved the painting back to the living room. Fourth night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the apartment felt magnified. The fridge hum, pipes settling, my own breathing. All of it drowned under one faint whispering sound. I couldn't trace. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized, just a layered hiss, like several voices speaking quietly over each other. And then the whispering came from the painting. I walked closer without meaning to. The figures were at the edge of the forest now. Their shapes were no longer vague. They had limbs, posture, presence. The crouched one had elongated arms dragging along the painted dirt. The tall one stood rigid, its head bent too far to the side. The original figure, I finally realized it wasn't blurry because of bad brushwork. The blur was movement, a smear left behind as it shifted positions. The forest inside the painting suddenly looked deeper than it should, as if the path went farther than the canvas allowed, a depth that shouldn't exist. On the fifth night, I woke to a soft scratching sound. Not on the walls, on the floor, inches from my bedroom door. I didn't want to open it. I really didn't. But something in me knew the sound would continue forever if I didn't face it. The living room lights flickered as soon as I stepped out. My breath turned into white mist. The painting hung crooked on the wall, and there were only two figures now. The crouched one was gone. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. A wet trail of soil led from the front of the painting across the floor and disappeared behind the couch. Fresh dirt, as if something had stepped out of the woods onto my carpet. I grabbed the largest kitchen knife I owned and slowly circled the room. The track stopped near the window, but there was no sign of anything outside or inside. Just silence and the lingering smell of moss. I turned back toward the painting and froze. The missing crouched figure was back, but not in the canvas. Its shape was reflected faintly in the glass, behind me. I spun around, but nothing stood there. No creature, no shadow, only my own panicked breathing. When I faced the painting again, the figure was inside the forest once more, but now pressed closer to the frame. Its fingers stretched toward the edge, as if testing the barrier between the canvas and the room's sixth night. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the kitchen with every light on. My mind kept replaying the reflection, the dirt trail, the whispering. And when the lights flickered around dawn, I finally snapped. I tore the painting off the wall and smashed it against the floor. The frame splintered, the glass shattered, the canvas didn't tear. My hands shook as I tried again. The material stretched like skin, resisting every attempt. No cracks, no holes, no damage. Then something tapped me on the shoulder. I dropped everything and ran out of the apartment barefoot. I didn't return until the sun was fully up. When I finally forced myself back inside, the painting was gone from the floor. It was hanging perfectly straight on the wall again. And now the forest in the painting was empty. No figures. But the trail inside the artwork, it extended all the way to the frame's edge, almost as if the figures had completely stepped out. Some nights I hear the whispering right behind the walls. Sometimes it's in the hallway. Sometimes it's at the foot of my bed. Last night, the cold spot returned, but not near the painting. It was right beside me. After his small plane crashes in a forest whispered about only at night, Jason thinks survival is about water and fire. But the forest watches, patient and cunning shadows stretch, trees mark warnings, and silence itself hunts. He may have escaped, but the forest hasn't forgotten him. Jason had never flown alone before. The small aircraft rattled violently in turbulence he hadn't anticipated, then slammed into an unseen ridge, splitting the fuselage like paper. He woke tangled in metal, bleeding, teeth chattering, surrounded by trees that reached impossibly high, their canopies blotting out the sun. The forest was alive with sound and absence. The wind whispered in patterns, branches creaked with intention, and somewhere deep, a pulse like a heartbeat throbbed beneath the soil. GPS was useless. Phone calls vanished into static. He was entirely terrifyingly alone. Locals had warned him about this forest, murmuring tales he had dismissed as superstition. People disappear here, they said. Dogs return without owners. Rescue teams vanish, eyes hollow, bodies never recovered. At first, Jason believed he could survive. He found a stream and drank. He used metal scraps to craft a knife. He built rudimentary traps, caught fish in the icy current, and slept under crude shelters made of branches and leaves. Every night, though, the shadows seemed thicker. Every rustle sounded like calculated movement. The first markings appeared after 2 days, slashes in bark, tall and vertical, jagged but deliberate, like claws had carved them. He couldn't tell if it was one creature or many. Each day, the symbols multiplied, appearing ahead of him, on trees he had not yet reached, sometimes behind him in places he had already passed. The forest was mapping him, tracking him, mocking him. Nights brought the worst. A presence stalked the periphery of his firelight, breathing heavy and rhythmic, neither fully animal nor fully human. Something tall, impossibly long-limbed, moved with the silence of a shadow and the patience of a predator that had all the time in the world. He tried to run, to hide, to fight back with fire, traps, and makeshift weapons. Nothing worked. It watched, learned, adapted. Jason began to notice patterns. It never approached closer than 20 steps, yet always stayed just within sight. It left fresh marks in places he thought safe. He could almost sense its thought process. It toyed with him, shaping his environment into a labyrinth of fear. Every snapped twig, every bent branch, every shattered shelter was a message. It wanted him afraid. It wanted him to understand that the forest owned him, and survival would be an illusion. Time lost meaning. Days blurred into nights, nights into endless shadows. Hunger gnawed, exhaustion crumbled his body, and fear hollowed his mind. Yet he could not rest. Every nap, every moment of weakness was monitored. He awoke to find his traps destroyed, shelters burned, paths altered. The forest had rewritten itself while he slept, and he could not escape its design. The final confrontation was chaotic, brutal, pure survival. He ran, crawled through mud, hurled fish carcasses as distractions, and used a jagged fragment of the fuselage as a knife. The creature moved like water, fluid and unpredictable, yet deliberate. He struck, but he could not tell if it was wounded or if he had only provoked it further. The fight ended when he collapsed, bleeding, broken, barely conscious. As the creature melted into the darkness, he emerged from the forest days later, half alive, legs mangled, muscles shredded, skin raw. But the forest's shadow followed him. Vertical marks, fresh and precise, appeared in his apartment. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Every night, he wakes to feel the weight of unseen eyes. Jason remembers every moment of being hunted, the unbearable silence, the anticipation in the air, the way his heartbeat echoed like a drum of doom. The forest taught him that it does not just consume bodies, it consumes minds. It waits, infinitely patient, and every decision is a gamble with death. Even in safety, he cannot shake it. A creak in his ceiling, a shadow stretching too long, a symbol etched in his walls. The forest survives in him, and the creature, it is still waiting, watching, learning, patient, and somewhere deep, Jason knows the hunt is not over. The forest never forgets. A sudden storm traps a family in their isolated home. At first, it seems like nothing more than wind and rain, but then shadows move on their own, objects shift without explanation, and a presence patient and silent begins to stalk them. By nightfall, they realize they are not alone. The storm came without warning. Rain hammered the windows like fists, and wind tore through the trees, bending them to impossible angles. Inside the old house, the family huddled together, lights flickering, candles guttering in the draft. At first, it was just the weather, chaotic, loud, and terrifying. But as hours passed, unease grew. The house seemed alive in ways no storm could explain. Floorboards creaked where no one walked, doors shifted slightly when unobserved, and the shadows cast by the fire danced too deliberately. At first, each of them moved cautiously on their own, drawn to the source of strange noises, a soft thud from upstairs, a whispering scrape from the basement, a fleeting movement in the corner of a darkened room. Every step was measured, every breath shallow. Something was in the house. They could feel it. A presence, patient, watching, calculating. Then it became impossible to ignore. A shadow glided across the hallway, leaving deep, jagged scratches in the wooden frame. A distant thump sounded like a heavy hand striking the walls. The youngest screamed when a drawer slammed shut by itself. Fear became action. They regrouped in the main room, huddled under the flickering light of a single lantern, the fire from the hearth barely keeping darkness at bay. Their eyes darted to every corner, every hallway. Every creak was a heartbeat of panic. But terror turned into adrenaline when the father, determined to confront it, grabbed a heavy candlestick and went in search of the source. The shadow moved faster than anything human should. It lashed out with unnatural speed, claws scratching along the walls, furniture toppling as it advanced. He swung the candlestick, striking something solid. A hiss, sharp and wet, echoed through the hallway. Smoke rose from a scorched patch of floor where he had caught it with a flick of fire. For a brief moment, it recoiled, its form barely visible, almost serpentine in the dark. Chaos erupted. The creature tested their courage, moving in bursts, disappearing, and leaving a trail of destruction. Splintered doors, deep gouges in the wood, and a smell of iron and decay. They ran, stumbled over debris, flung makeshift weapons, and finally retreated to the hearth, breathing heavily, hearts hammering. For the first time, the family sat together, united by fear and the need to survive, the flickering light forming a fragile barrier against the unseen predator. Hours passed. Outside, the storm raged less violently, its fury diminishing to gusts and rain-soaked silence. Then, with a sudden creak, the front door jerked violently, as if pushed from outside. The family froze, shadows stretched across the room as the door swung open fully, revealing nothing but darkness. A shape or a suggestion of one paused at the threshold, tall, hunched, inhuman. Then it slipped into the night, vanishing along with the storm. Relief should have followed, but it did not. As dawn crept through the windows, they noticed the traces it had left behind, deep scratches on the floors, torn curtains, and footprints unlike any they had seen before. Some were elongated, clawed, others rounded like hooves. They traced a path through the house, evidence that the entity had moved freely, a ghostly presence that defied explanation. Even after the storm had passed, the house remained charged with tension. Every creak, every shifting shadow felt like a warning. The family knew they had survived physically, but the psychological scar remained. Somewhere, hidden just out of sight, the presence lingered. Patient, watching, waiting for the next storm. The father swore he could hear it moving at night, brushing past walls, breathing low and measured. The mother caught glimpses of shapes in the corner of her eyes that vanished when she looked directly. The children no longer slept, clutching each other in terror, and the house, once a shelter, now felt like a cage holding them and something else inside. It had been here all along. Perhaps it had always been. And with every storm, every flicker of darkness, it would return, reminding them that safety is never guaranteed and some shadows do not vanish, no matter how brightly you light the room. After a year away, their family dog returned. At first it was joy and relief, but soon the familiar paws and wagging tail revealed something impossible. Precision, intelligence, and unnatural strength hinted that this was no ordinary dog. Every action was deliberate, every shadow a threat. They realized the dog they knew was gone. It had been a year since Max disappeared. The yard was empty, the leash untouched, and the house felt hollow without the thrum of his paws. Posters went up, calls were made, but the city seemed to have swallowed him. So when he appeared on a rainy night, the family ran to him, laughter and tears mingling as he wagged his tail and nuzzled them. Relief and joy washed over them. At first it seemed like nothing had changed. Max was back, safe, familiar, but almost immediately, subtle signs emerged that something was different. His eyes glimmered with an unnatural intelligence, cold and precise. He moved with deliberate intent, observing the family with a patience no dog could possess. Objects shifted slightly when he approached. Doors nudged open with a paw, and the faintest scratching echoed in empty rooms. The first truly alarming incident came on a walk Max encountered a lone wolf in the forest behind the house. Normally, even a large dog could barely defend itself, but Max attacked with terrifying skill. Every bite, every leap, every strike was calculated. When he returned, he carried no sign of struggle beyond the wolf lying defeated almost ceremoniously. It was not the behavior of a dog. It was the behavior of a predator, aware of every weakness. Back at home, the small, subtle anomalies multiplied. Chairs shifted in his path. Books toppled from shelves at the precise moment someone walked beneath them, and doors closed softly but firmly behind family members as if to trap them. At first, they dismissed it as coincidence, attributing cleverness or luck to the animal they loved. But then it escalated. One night, the father stepped into the hallway, and Max blocked the doorway, eyes locked on him, growling low, not like a dog, but like something aware of every possible escape route. The father stumbled, the table tipped over, and Max calmly stepped aside, allowing him through. Just barely, Max began demonstrating an eerie understanding of their routines and vulnerabilities. When one of the children wandered near the basement, he appeared behind them, pawing at a heavy object that tipped into the stairwell, a near accident that jolted everyone awake. He would manipulate doors, furniture, and even light, subtly corralling them into corners or limiting their escape. There was no malice in his expression, only precision, as if the house itself were a chessboard and Max the player. Despite this mounting fear, the family clung to the hope that this was still Max. He returned to nuzzle them, to sit at their feet, to sleep at the foot of the bed, but each moment of affection was punctuated by subtle intimidation. The glow in his eyes would catch in the dark, and a simple tail wag would seem too measured, too deliberate. He was no longer just a dog. They could feel the other presence inside him, something foreign, calculating, watching. It culminated one night when the family tried to confine him to the yard. Max approached with methodical grace, moving objects to block exits, nudging doors closed, and trapping one of the children in the hallway for a moment that felt like eternity. They realized then that they could not kill him. He was too fast, too clever, and too other. To do so would be to court disaster. Faced with no alternative, they made the grim decision to leave. Packing their belongings, they relocated to another town, another house. Hoping to sever the connection, Max remained behind, confined as best they could manage, but free enough to move about in the old home. They told themselves it was a safety measure, and yet, even from afar, signs of his presence lingered. In the old house, scratches appeared on walls, books toppled, and a faint, deliberate thumping echoed through the empty rooms. Visitors swore they felt eyes watching them, shadows slipping along the edges of their vision. The dog they once loved had returned, yes, but it was no longer Max. It was something else, something that could think, plan, and wait. The family lives in a new home now, physically safe, but each phone call, each memory carries the weight of that lingering presence. They cannot forget the intelligence in those glowing eyes, the way he seemed to understand their weaknesses, the quiet terror of realizing that the pet they had cherished was gone forever. Somewhere behind locked doors, in the abandoned house, he waits, patient, clever, inhuman. Some nights they dream of paw prints across the floor, perfectly spaced and deliberate. They wake to the faint echo of claws, the shift of furniture, and the reminder that leaving him behind did not end the danger. Max, or what had become of him, remains watching, waiting, calculating. And when the time comes, anyone who dares enter the old house will understand that the dog they loved was never truly theirs again.